Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. You guys asked for it. It has come. It's Kripp's crafting guide for Un'Goro. Now, this was a very tricky one to do because Un'Goro has a lot of different viable decks, and they typically rely on having their own class legendary that only belongs in that one deck, and that makes it very tricky. The main answer to what you should be playing has to do with, well, if you have a legendary or two and those belong in one of the good decks, you can try making that good deck. Or otherwise, there are a number of very powerful budget decks. In fact, some of these are probably too powerful. Pirate Warrior, still around, basically the same, very similar lists at least as the previous expansion. That's one of, if not the best deck in the game right now. Mid-Range Hunter, also one of maybe the best deck in the game right now. Then there's Zulok. None of these decks have legendaries except some of them run patches, of course, but if you have patches from last expansion, you won't need to craft anything. And these are all kind of very aggressive decks. So one card that I'm not going to recommend you craft is the Rogue Quest. And that might get people a bit off guard because there's certainly a lot of, riled up people in the community talking about the Rogue Quest. I think it's a bad idea to craft the Rogue Quest because I don't think the Quest Rogue is particularly better than any of the three aggressive decks I just mentioned. And the three aggressive decks I just mentioned don't really require any expensive cards except for a few rares and stuff. So if you really have nothing, just play one of those decks. If you happen to get the Rogue Quest when opening packs, then sure, you can try that. But the other risk with the Rogue Quest, something that we saw in patches in the last expansion, they probably won't nerf the Rogue Quest, but if they do choose to adjust some cards, it'll probably be like Swashbuckler or something like that. So if you craft the Rogue Quest, the deck is not, I don't even think it's better than any of those three decks, by the way. But maybe it's a little better, but it's around there, right? So if you craft the Rogue Quest, it might be around there, but so many people are complaining about it, they might just nerf it anyway, but they might nerf it by changing one of the low rarity cards, thus making your crafting of a legendary quest kind of useless. So I do not recommend you craft the Rogue Quest. I do recommend, out of all the quests, the Warrior Quest to craft. There's many different versions of the Taunt Warrior. There's very passive versions. There's versions with a lot of removal that act a lot like Control Warrior. I played N'Zoth variants. I play versions that have almost no spells whatsoever, just taunts, so you get your quest out right away. It's actually a pretty flexible archetype, and for someone like me who gets bored of any one given deck very, very quickly, I did not get bored of playing any of the variants of the Quest Warrior, and the Quest Warrior is also one of the best decks in the game right now. And I just don't see them nerfing this card. I just don't see that happening. It's not as oppressive. It's certainly a beatable deck, and it doesn't really push you out of the game right away as most aggro decks do. So it's not really that frustrating to play against either. So it's a pretty value craft. The other cards, keep in mind, these other cards belong in a multitude of decks. So the other card I recommend you craft if you don't have one is Primordial Glyph. Yes, it's not a legendary. You have to keep in mind there's actually very few neutral legendaries, and in my opinion, they all kind of blow. So this is not really a legendary crafting guide. It's more so like an Un'Goro crafting guide. Primordial Glyph is literally in every single Mage deck, and because the expansion came out this year and not at the end of last year, you have at least a year and a half of using this card. Probably about 2 years of using this card, and it's probably going to belong in every Mage deck. So if you're thinking of playing Mage decks in the next 2 years and you don't have yourself a Primordial Glyph, you can go ahead and craft it fairly safely because it is an extremely powerful card. Usually you're given very good options, and as a result of having the discounts, it allows you to have very unfair turns later in the game. And since the early game doesn't really matter that much when you have board clears and other tempo pushes, you'll be just fine by playing a card like this in the early game. Very similarly, Shadow Visions, similar type of card. It doesn't seem as powerful as Primordial Glyph, but because priests play more of a control game, and as a control deck, you generally just need the right answer at the right time. This card helps you get that. Shadow Visions is literally in every single priest deck that I managed to find, and there's a decent amount of priests on ladder. And yeah, the future of priest is always worrisome, but we worried about it a lot in this expansion, and they made it A lot of decent priest decks out there, and since all of them have Shadow Visions, I do think it's a pretty safe craft as well. As far as the neutrals, the only neutral that I thought was pretty good out of the high rarity ones was the Primordial Drake. It's seen at ×2 in Taunt Warrior. It's seen in all the dragon decks. There's not too many of those. It's seen in a few of the control decks. It's just an overall very good card, and if you think you'd be playing decks of that archetype, it's a pretty fair craft, particularly a 1-of if you have a Curator from the Karazhan expansion. The other card I recommend, it's actually not an Un'Goro card, but it is Dirty Rat. Dirty Rat saw some play when it was released in Mean Streets of Gaj's-Hand, but it has really taken hold of the meta right now. And the reason it's done that is it's a very good counter to Quest Rogue, it's a very good counter to most aggressive decks, and it's a very good counter to combo decks. And if you're playing a control versus control matchup when you have like a big board clear, you can just trade your Dirty Rat for a random card in your opponent's hand, and that's also very valuable. So Dirty Rat belongs in most control decks, and if you are thinking about playing Taunt Warrior, you kind of need Dirty Rat. Like, it's that good. It'll help you immensely. Now, there's really not that many other cards I recommend you craft. All the other cards that really work are common or rare rarity, which again might seem like, wow, that's so generous of them to only have, a few powerful high rarity cards. It's not actually the case. Un'Goro is fairly bad in terms of the free-to-play experience, unless you want to play one of the first few decks I mentioned, Pirate Warrior, Midrange Hunter, or Zulak. It's just that a lot of the cards just belong in very specific decks. So I do not recommend you craft cards like that unless you really, really want to play those decks, in which case you're probably not looking for advice on how to spend your probably fairly limited dust pool. Now, if you do have all what you want, or if you want to have more of a safe investment, there's a few cards from Classic that I think you should consider crafting. So we lost a lot of the big legendary crafts from the Classic set with Ragnaros and Sylvanas. Those are the top two in the past for craftables. But number 3 is still a very strong one. Number 3 on Classic Legendaries has typically been Blood Mage Thalnos. Blood Mage Thalnos does see a presence in many of the decks right now, and it has seen presence in many of the decks in the last 3 years. So if you don't have one and you have some dust to spare and you think it'll help some of the decks that you're trying to play, Blood Mage Thalnos is probably the safest craft that you're going to get because it's part of the Classic set. It's never going to exit the standard format unless it gets Hall of Fame, in which case we probably can expect a full refund on the card as well. Another couple cards from the Classic set that you can consider that have shined in this meta and many in the past make you think maybe you should get them. There is Van Cleef. So if you are an avid rogue player and you're like, man, I don't know, do I really want to craft a class legendary? I don't know. Well, Van Cleef just seems to make it. It's made it in rogue decks for years now, and it seems to be the highlight of many right now. So I don't really expect that will change in a dramatic way in the future in Hearthstone. And third on my list of Classic craftables is Ice Block. Ice Block right now is in every single Mage deck, and Ice Block in the past has been part of almost every single Mage deck. There seems to be a big push from Blizzard every couple expansions or so to encourage people to play secrets, and Mage secrets are just crap. So the only secret that's ever worth playing is Ice Block. So, right now it's worth playing. Probably in a couple expansions, there's going to be additional incentives to play secrets. And once again, Ice Block is going to come up and be in every single Mage deck at that point in time. So again, a pretty safe Classic craft. So that's about it. I know there's a lot of cards I didn't mention. There's like Calamos, there's like Lyra. There's a lot of cards that are really good, but they only fit in one deck, and I wouldn't really invest dust myself, so I can't really recommend that you do. Let me know what you think. Hope my video has served well, and hopefully your dust investments pay off. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.